Hi, everybody. This is Testing Minutes podcast about software testing, just brief and straight to the point. And today, as always, here are our hosts of the podcast. It's me, Alexander Romanov.
It's me, Artem Rehorenko.
And our main goal for today is to talk to our wonderful guest, Simon Pryor. Hi, Simon.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And hi, Simon, again. And the main idea and the main topic of this episode is to talk about software testing, but not only about software testing, but software testing in the airline industry, because it's like, I think many people in the world are testing websites or testing mobile applications, but not so much people in the industry testing something related to airline industry. And Simon has a lot of experience in it. So he's head of quality engineering at easyJet. And beside that, he's one of the hosts of the also interesting podcast about software testing. It's called Testing Peers. And he's doing a lot of other conference talks. So I think, Simon, you will share with us a lot of insights and very interesting thoughts on what does it mean to test in the airline industry. So the first thing that we can start is, can you tell us a bit about how have you actually found this job and why the airlines?
Oh, good question. I guess my career started back in 2007. Graduated from university with a computer science degree. Was determined not to go into a software development role, particularly C++. Absolutely hated C++ and its pointers and all that fun stuff. But inevitably ended up in a C++ development graduate role working for a big antivirus company. And I stayed in the cybersecurity world for 12 years, but only as a developer for the first 3. While I was a developer, I was 10 to 15 years more junior than the rest of the development team. So I never got near the meaty code. It was just the 2-line bug fixes, the changing the ints to an int64, all that kind of small stuff that wasn't going to impact the big meaty stuff. So I started looking at what else I could do to help the team, and I ended up taking on some of the QA roles in the sprints. And we were very proficient at defining our tests straight away, writing the Perl scripts that were the automation. And before we marked anything as passed, we had to have it running in the automation suite. So it was very much automation was part and parcel of what we did. So I became a QA engineer in 2010, and then worked up into sort of QE lead, QA manager roles, and then left in 2018 to try something new. Went into a sort of program test manager role, working at the UK National Lottery, which was a big eye-opener because I went from a tech company, which was purely developing tech products, to the National Lottery, where IT was a background thing that happened to make the lottery happen. And the testing was all very waterfall. The QA team sat in a separate place to the rest of the business. We were downstairs where all the other IT teams were upstairs. So we were separate. It was very different. Lots of suppliers. That was my first experience of working with suppliers and that kind of stuff. Stuck there for a year, and then a friend of mine was the head of QA at easyJet at the time, and she pulled me across and said, look, I've got a role for you. Come and be test manager for our digital website, mobile apps, all that kind of stuff. We need some test management there. So it was basically although I was moving to the airline, I was testing websites again. So my team were testing the website that we booked tickets and all that kind of stuff. So it was all still website testing. But the big thing was all the background integrations into our airline reservation system and our APIs and our payroll system and all the other stuff that was all airline specific stuff. That was in 2020. So I was given the digital testing role, and then the whole world stopped for nearly 2 years. And we didn't fly for a year, for 18 months. So we were literally skeleton staff. So I was doing a lot more than I was originally planned to be doing because there was less of us. And then when we come out of the pandemic, we decided that So sorry, during the pandemic, the QA function was disbanded. The head of QA was let go. There was only a few of us that were left in the building to be the sort of skeleton staff. Come out of the pandemic, there was a need for that QA function to be recreated. I interviewed for it, got the head of QA role, and then I owned the testing for all of easyJet, which wasn't just the website anymore. It was our operational systems. So our systems that put crew on planes to make sure we've got the right scheduling and rostering for the crew so they're not working too many hours, making sure the planes are scheduled in the right way, the flights are all fully booked, etc. All the systems that maintain the aircraft and work on the aircraft, all the HR systems, the finance systems, everything all came under QA that I needed to make sure my team were testing. And that's when my eyes opened to it. So that's where I got to, really. That's how I'm where I am now. I'm managing all of testing across all IT systems in easyJet.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating journey, and especially having the fact that like airline industry, as you just said, that it was really in the, I'm not saying like in big trouble, but it was just a little bit shut down during the pandemic because nobody has used it a lot. And for me, only when you just told us, I started to think about, so despite the fact that there are mobile applications and web applications for just for the end users, there are a lot of systems under the hood, and in our podcast we are starting our conversation generally with the questions with like terminology. So what differs testing in the regular, let's say, web application or something like regular project and the project that is connected to airlines and like big with a lot of moving parts on it.
So I think the big difference is a lot of the systems we use we don't build in house. A lot of them are SaaS vendor solutions that we integrate in. A lot of the, especially for the operational airline operations systems, we have to use trusted vendors that build this kind of software all the time and integrate it into our estate and then make it easyJet specific. So that requires a different mindset from testing. You're no longer just taking a build from developers and testing what the developers have done. You're taking a product that's pre-built by another company and making sure it can be plugged into easyJet and integrated in the right way. So that changes your testing mindset to be, okay, what are we going to, when we decide on the vendor we're going to use, how are we going to ensure that they test their software in the right way so that we don't have to do as much testing? So you start asking all the right questions about, how do they do testing? Do they do automation? Do they have a test environment that they can share with us that when we do our testing, we use the same setup? How can we configure it? How much configuration do we need to make it specific to us and not just the vanilla instance that they might deploy to us? So it becomes about that integration testing, and then it's about end user testing. So in the example of our operation systems, we have a big control center that runs all the systems that need to monitor the aircraft and the crew and stuff. They need to be able to use it. So we need to make sure that we've tested it with them to make sure they can do that testing. So it's all about that SaaS testing model. And I've recently put together a talk and a blog post all about testing in a SaaS world, where it's less about developing in-house and being agile and working side by side with the developers, and more about understanding what that vendor is delivering to you and how you can make it work for your own context. And that might require less hands-on testing, but you still need that testing mindset. You still need to look at integrations and how it plugs in through APIs into the rest of your estate, doing that end-to-end flow, doing performance, but maybe less on the actual functional does it work, because you trust that the vendor is doing their testing. And we've got multiple vendors for different systems. So it's then, making sure that vendor does it this way, but that vendor's also doing it in a way that we can work with, and they're not doing it in 15 different ways that we need to then work together to bring together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And actually, here's one thing I want to ask. As you said, you trust vendors. And the most of the testing goes like integration testing. So you integrate different systems from different vendors with maybe some operational center, as you said, on your. And how do you, for example, manage what you focus on like currently? And actually, I'm curious about what is the release cycle. I mean, how much time it takes to release something on this huge system, and you need how you operate, because some changes may required in one system, some changes required in another system,
Yeah.
and how you manage all of these
Yeah,
parts here.
it's a really good question. I mean, we have over 150 systems plugged together across our whole estate. So you can imagine that at any one point, there's a change that needs to impact 3 or 4 systems at one point. So, while we're moving to more of an agile mindset in the digital space with the web and mobile apps, on the operational IT side, we still very much are in project, end-to-end project delivery mode where we assess which systems are impacted, we work out how we're going to deliver it, we get the vendors to make their changes to the systems, and then we pull together that end-to-end testing strategy to give confidence for the business. That will require us to coordinate drops at different points. Most vendors are delivering to us infrequently, so it's some vendors only deliver us once a year, others deliver us monthly or quarterly a year, and we have to ensure we've got those projects lined up in the right fashion to make sure we get the most out of those deliveries at those points in time. Some of the smaller vendors we can control a bit more, as we need this change and we need it by this point, and they then work on that delivery cycle with us. But it's about having, and we've got a very effective portfolio management, project management team that coordinate a lot of these projects to make sure that they are aligned so that we can deliver the changes in the systems at the right point and making sure all the impacts are covered off. So, yeah, we don't have a set release cycle. It is about when there's a need for a project, when we need to make changes, when there's compliance changes, when there's regulatory changes. So, maybe some of the cruise regulations or something are changing, so we need to make sure the systems update that. Or if there's a new EU law being passed that's going to impact customers, we need to make sure our systems are updated to enable those additional checks in the airport and stuff like that. So there's lots of different things that come into play, and then we make sure that the projects are delivered in the right fashion with the right testing at the right points. And when I say testing, I'm not just talking about testing team sitting at the end making sure it's tested before it goes to customers. We are engaged all the way through, from testability of requirements, user stories if they're in place, designs, conversations, discussions with vendors. We are engaged along the way up until that point of it goes live.
Yeah, it looked like the whole process is pretty complex, and if there are a lot of vendors, and so you have a lot of like inputs from vendors, like the end, let's say, end products that you need to assess, and then you have additional requirements from the regulatory or compliance side. You have requirements from the actual people that are on the field, on how to improve or fix the technical side. And the big question is how to determine the who should fix the issue. So it's because issues are there, it happens, and we are in the, like, as guards of quality, we just there to make them, like, not going to production. But how are you dealing with the bugs and bug fixes?
It's collaboration. It's making sure we've got relationships with the vendors. It's making sure that there's contractual agreements in place for SLAs for how long it takes to fix bugs. But it's also about making sure we've done our homework first before we hand the bug to them. So we've identified exactly where the issue occurs, how it occurs, etc., and not just gone, oh, it's not working, there's a bug. We make sure we've done our work first to say, we believe it's in this function or in this system, in this part of the code, etc., to make it easier for them to triage and go away and do their own thing. Now, it's not always possible to have understanding of the exact code line it's happened in, because we might not have the code visible to us, but we can do as much as we can to provide as much information, screenshots, exact environment configurations, etc., to enable them to find exactly what they need to do to fix it. And 9 times out of 10, they'll return things within the SLA. There may be occasions where we find more bugs than we expect to find during our testing, and actually we start hitting on functional bugs rather than just integration level bugs. And that's where we're starting now to bring in this automated smoke test that we bring in for all vendors, like a vendor acceptance test almost, where we, as soon as they drop us a build, we'd run a 15-minute test that just automates some key scenarios. And if they pass, then we start our proper testing. If they don't pass, we hand it back to them and say, no, sorry, the basics aren't working. Please come back with another build. And we start to build that process in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have actually a question, because you have many vendors and you integrate them. How is there any unification of instruments, of languages, like programming languages or technology stuff between them? Maybe if there is another vendor once you are looking for your system, how you decide, are you going to use it or not, and all this process.
So there might not be sort of alignment between the vendors themselves with each other, but what we tend to do is, when we're talking to them about the testing and the potential automation that we're putting in place, we will ask them about what tools they are using for their automation on their side, and then we will look at see if whether we can make sure we've got something in the same tool system. So we've had stuff recently where some of our operational systems are in. I can't remember the name of it now. That name's gone. It's not Cypress or Selenium. It was actually a vendor, a sort of end user tool, test automation tool, and we made sure we did a trial with that ourselves as well, and worked out whether we could do our automation in the same tool, so that we could have conversations with them about, our tests are passing, your tests are failing, etc., and working through it in that way. So that's what we've been working to, trying to ensure we pair up on that with the vendors themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you have a lot of subsystems, because basically you are testing system of system, and if you have these subsystems, then they should integrate using some APIs, common APIs.
100%.
It can be REST, or it can be like some event-driven integration or something else. So what are the common ways to integrate? Because we need to test it anyway in the end, like the integration part. So how do you approach it?
Yeah, so we have our own integration layer that everything plugs into. That's the key part of it, and then those systems plug into that integration layer, and we can test the end-to-end flow through those systems as part of that. So we make sure they're aware of how they need to connect into that, whether it's APIs or it's message buses or however else it needs to be done. We make sure we've got that pipe set up so they can communicate through. And that also ensures the data is in the same format as it needs to be for when it comes out of one system and goes into the next, so that we've not got that data mismatch as well. So that's part of our testing strategies as well, making sure that we've got that end-to-end test pipeline set up so that we can work through system into system along the way. And then working out what tools we can use, whether there is API checking tools like or Postman or etc. that we can use to validate that API communication, or if it's a message bus, making sure we've got something that can validate the data in and out of the message bus to ensure we've got that traffic going through.
And another interesting question that just like a continuation as the previous one. So, do you perform any kind of field testing? Because a part of the things is just checking information or subsystems from the, as I understood, from the airplane itself, like how it's ready, whether it's monitored and something like that, and whether you are doing testing in production, let's say.
There is certain elements of that, depending on the testing, depending on the project, depending on the systems. We might do test flights where we actually get testers on the flights to ensure that the systems that are in play, whether it be an onboard retail device so they can actually buy food on the plane, and making sure that system network works up and tallies through to the finances. We would do on-flight testing where needed, and in airport testing as well. If it's like the systems that you do your bag checking in and whatever else, we make sure that we've got the ability to do testing in a live airport.
And in general, so which approaches can we learn to be prepared to test such systems? I mean, like whether it is only API testing or it's something more. So what are you using
I think there's
for the
there's
subsystems?
there's certain amounts of testing that you'll need to do. Sort of API testing, lower level system testing, depending on the layer of the tech stack that you're working on. But when we get to the actual airport testing, we'll do all we can apart from the UI testing that we have to do in the airport, and then we work through that particular system. And the same in the planes. We make sure we've done all the technical level testing earlier on, and then we just need to do the basic customer facing testing effectively when we're in those spaces. But it's working through the different tiers, the different layers of the systems to make sure we've done all the levels before we get to the customer facing or the user facing level, as it may be.
I actually have a question because it's different parts and they're integrated, like digital part, like website, mobile, and everything, and also integrated with other system. And in aviation, it looks like safety critical, right, system. Uh, could you provide your insights, thoughts about the testing such type of it's not software, I would say, like, but it's such type of systems like safety criticals, what your approach there is, some risk, how do you proceed with risk management, because I think the risk management is the main part in such system. And um, usually what I can see in mm, many like topics discussed over the internet, it's about like, oh, we are not safety critical systems, or we are not going to do this and that and that, and now we are talking about safety critical system. And I want to know what like main approaches, main practices are using in to test and verify such systems.
So the challenge we have is a lot of the safety critical systems would not be owned by one particular airline; that they would be more centrally managed. So we don't necessarily get involved in the testing of some of those safety critical systems.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that impact us directly, we will have a way of testing it, and whether it's us or through our partners, we will be testing that. But some of the more safety critical systems that actually might be monitoring whether the planes are working correctly, et cetera, are not done by us. They might be done by the airline manufacturers or the aircraft manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. So we will be aware of stuff, but we won't necessarily be testing the fully safety critical stuff. We're just one of the airlines that might use those systems. So it's more of the customer side of testing for us in that perspective.
And speaking about like the things that influence the whole approach and management of quality in such big system. So, what are the biggest standards, regulatory standards that you need to adhere and you need to follow in your testing approaches and
Um,
development?
well, there's obviously there's aircraft airline regulatory boards that we have to make sure we adhere to. There's finance regulatory boards for anything that's processing payments, etc., etc. And we have a whole long list of different regulators that we need to make sure are covered off, and they are part of our sign-off process before we release anything that's impacting those areas. If it's anything touching crew, there's various crew unions that need to make sure that they've had their regulatory sign-off as well. So anything that's impacting crew schedules or crew pay or anything like that needs to go through those regulatory boards as well. So there's, depending on the area of the system, depends on the regulatory boards that are involved that need to be engaged, informed, consulted, etc. at various points throughout the cycle.
Actually, regarding the regulation and all of these things, is there any like standards that you are aligned with testing or maybe influence your testing in the company?
There's not any standards that directly impact how we do testing. There are standards that we need to be aware of from an airline regulatory perspective, but they're not ones that impact our testing. We are able to create our own test strategies, test plans, define them, and share them with the relevant parties. There's not been an instance so far where we've been told that it's not meeting regulatory compliance or anything like that in the way we're testing things, because we've always ensured we're working in a way that's standard as possible, looking at the quality and alleviating the risk as much as possible. So we're aware of the regulations, but we're not necessarily letting them impact our testing directly at this point in time.
And if we just make a little bit of like zoom out in terms of strategy and tools, and so there are a lot of approaches in the world of testing, like rapid software testing, holistic testing, agile testing, and so on. So do you use something like that, or you have your own principles for building quality culture inside the easyJet?
Yeah, we have our own principles. We've recently, in the last couple of years, moved to more quality engineering focus rather than testing or QA. So it's more about that holistic quality from all the way through the cycle. And we've got principles that we're collaborating over, siloed work. We're looking at customer needs rather than rigid process, all this kind of stuff to make sure that any testing plan we're creating for a particular project is focused on the customer or the end user, business user needs of that system. And we then work through that, collaborating every step of the way to ensure the right QE strategy, plan, execution, etc., is done in that form for them. So we do use risk-based testing. That's a big part of our testing process, because for a lot of these systems there's so many configurations and possible scenarios that we need to cover off that we'd be testing for months in some scenarios when we haven't got that time frame. So we ensure that we're doing the top 40% tests or whatever it may be through a risk-based approach to understand where the biggest challenge could be, and then we ensure that the vendor side are doing their piece as well.
I'm curious, actually. Is there any practice that you would say this is how easyJet is doing? Like maybe it's something that you're proud of in your company about the quality, the testing, quality assurance, or anything. Like this is our way of working, or this is our something.
So I think it's really comes down to how we've built the culture of quality, how we've embedded quality in the conversation as early as possible. Whereas it used to just be we were a testing team that come in at the end and did a bit of testing before it went out the door. We are now fully part of that cycle. And with the culture of quality was all about sharing that passion, immersing the team in the passion, making sure the whole team is engaged with the direction, and then that passion sort of dissipating outwards. So we then bring stakeholders on the journey. We can then use those relationships with stakeholders to start bringing automation in and getting the buy-in more quickly. And then it's just a continuous loop of feedback, and we continue that process of small incremental changes and improvements across the board. And while it's difficult to have any measures of how that success is, just the fact that we're in conversations, and most project stakeholders will be like, have you engaged QE? QE need to be engaged in the discussion. We can't go any further until QE are engaged. That never used to be the case. It was, oh, you're testing, you only come in at the end. Well, that's changed. That's definitely the direction we've gone, is we're more engaged all the way through. And we've got people that are passionate about shouting about quality and making sure it's part of those discussions as early as possible.
And actually, another question here, and I'm curious because it's not like I don't think it's like it was one-time change, like with flick of your fingers. Like, how much time it take you to come with this culture? With, I would say it's like buzzword like shift left approach, where you engage your quality engineers in the first phases of
it's an ongoing. The culture's an ongoing thing. You never get to the end of, oh, we've reached that point now. but also with the fact we use a lot of vendor sort of third party sort of partners for our development and testing and project management resources, that's a rotating door. So every time we bring a new project in, a new project manager comes in, a new QE team comes in from a supplier, we have to educate them on the process as well. And it's a continuous thing of bringing everybody on that journey, and it's a continuous revolving door of new people coming in to try and bring them up to speed. So yeah, it's a constant education piece, and part of my team's challenge is to make sure that we are our own PR as far as we're putting the message out there as much as possible. We're ensuring the teams are engaged. We're ensuring the project stakeholders are aware of what we are doing so that we can then deliver what we need to deliver.
And speaking more about the quality culture and how to build it from, let's call it from scratch. So is it possible to build the culture only from the team level, or it should be like a movement from the main, let's say, from the quality manager or head of quality?
I think you have to start somewhere. And I found the best thing to do is to start to engage the team as early as possible. So when I first took on the test manager role, when I first joined, one of my first things was to get the team in a room and it's like, well, how are you currently working? What are your pain points? What are the misconceptions that the company has about testing? And it's, testers are there to break the system. We're just there to find bugs. We're not technical. There's all this stuff that comes out of the misconceptions and the misunderstanding of what testing is. And then you're like, right, how can we change that? And then you start to build these. We built principles that were all based around culture of quality, risk-based testing first. We automate where we need to automate, not automate everything. And all these kind of principles that we start to bring in that gets people going, okay, that's what they're all about. Now, what does that look like in reality? And then you start to show them what each principle means and how it can be implemented in each project or in each area of technical products area. And you start to get the team aligned. And when the team are then starting to see the value, they can then start to deliver it internally into their projects or into their teams. And then you can start to get the message out there. But it has to start from those conversations. You have to get the team understanding where their pain points are and where the challenges are and where the frustrations are and where the misconceptions from the business towards testing or QA or QE is. And then you can start to realign based on, well, this is what you think we do, but this is in reality what we can do if you enable us to do it, and then move from there.
Yeah, and I think in any transformation and quality transformation, the first thing is that the management and the people, I mean, like the engineering and the management, should understand the value of the quality, and they should want to change situation. Because if they don't want any change, then you can explain anything in any words and with any examples, then nothing will move, because people just will listen and just say, hey, it will not work for us, or it is like how we worked historically, it will never change. So that's like the common answers from the any kind of in management. So the first is there should be at least one person who with a desire to change or with a desire to improve situation, and I mean inside the team. And then only this is like will be a prerequisite for any person that will come from outside of the team to just do some magic, to improvements and something like that. So that's a big thing here.
Yeah, and it's very easy to get in that place where you're just sharing strategy decks or new ideas, and people are going, "Oh, this is nice, but let me get back to my day job." You need to actually have a tangible output from these strategy conversations, or this, "Hey, look, this is a new way of working." You need to put it in terms of how does this impact you? How will this impact my team? What difference am I going to see? What value am I going to get that I wasn't getting before? Is it going to cost me more money? That's all the kind of conversations that your stakeholders will start to have of, well, okay, it's nice that you've generated this new way of working, but if it's going to cost me 3 times as much, I'm not interested. I just want to pay for the testers at the end like I used to. So it's about making sure that everything you talk about, everything you share about is in a context that they understand and in a way that will help them to buy into it without any resistance. And it might be about, well, let us trial it with you. Let us do it for a week. Let us do it for a sprint. Let us do it for one small project that's not going to impact any other areas, and show you what we will do differently and how you will get the value from us. Just enabling us to write automation rather than it being seen as a bolt-on at the end of a project. Let us do automation along the way. That's something that has seen a difference, and we've saved £1 million or in the last 12 months through writing automation and putting automation in place on projects. It's just being able to showcase the value that you're getting from these initiatives can really help you move forward. But it's that big sell. You have to be able to sell it. It's not just a theory or a strategy deck that people look at once and go, oh, great, wonderful. It's not going to impact me. Don't care. You need to actually put it in terms that they go, oh, I can see the value there. Okay, I want to try that.
Yeah, it's totally true situation, and in many contexts, not only in particular the airlines. And speaking about automation, so as I understood, for the web automation, you have just something more widespread, like any tools as anybody is using, something like WebDriver or something. What are you using for mobile, and what are you using for any kind of like lower level system testing? Just a brief examples. Of course, there are like hundreds of systems, and
I mean, it's the standard ones. The Selenium WebDriver is used in places. We've got Cypress, we've got Browser Stack, we've got a few more sort of. So there's work we're doing with Flutter and stuff as well around the mobile app that's being developed in, and etc. So we try to keep a standard tool pack as much as possible. But yeah, Cypress, WebDriver, Browser Stack is the main sort of crux of our automation in that front end space.
Is there any custom? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
In the back end, depending on the system, so we've got Python. We've got Python written automation in Python for certain sort of back end systems. We've got. I'm trying to think some of the other tooling that we've used. A lot of them are standard tools that we have across the estate. But yeah, I'm just.
My question was,
work it all through now in my head. There's a few systems that we've worked with over the last 12 months. We tried Robot Framework for a while, where we had different open source libraries that we were trying to work through and pull them all together. We started looking at visual testing options where we can't get access to the elements of web pages, so we were pulling stuff in certain areas. So we try and dabble with the right tools in the right places, but obviously it's not always straightforward to get everything we want straight away. So I have actually got the list here. Obviously we use things like JMeter for performance testing still. There's Smart Bear tools in there. There's Soap UI. Cypress, Browser Stack, and Selenium are our main front-end tools. And then REST Sharp and Spec Flows used in some applications, some of our older applications. There's Ranorex in there from a UI elements perspective. The right mix, but it's making sure we've got the right selection of tools and not just bloating that list. We try and consolidate as much as possible, but it's difficult when you've got multiple vendors developing their systems in their own way. Making sure we can pull something together is useful.
Yeah, and actually, my question, I was curious because usually managers struggle and afraid to have many different tools across the company, and they try to unify everything, like starting from SDLC process, continue with tooling they use, continue with languages, programming languages, they use, and all of this kind of stuff. And here we just can see that the big company using really, it's not about like standard tools, but these tools are different, built on by different like companies, vendors, or maybe even if they're open source and stuff like this. And why? The question is, why the managers tend to unify everything, and is there any kind of not questions, the words we can say them, they then stop doing it and start looking on to use the right tool in the right place in the right time?
So I think a lot of it comes down to commercials of the systems. If you can consolidate on as fewer systems as possible, then you can probably get a deal that makes it cheaper across the wider space.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about understanding the need for the tool. I would always prefer to get a team of SDETs in to write automation bespoke to systems, but that isn't always cost effective. If there's a solution already out there that does it, and does it better than we could do ourselves, then why would you not try it at least? I'm not one for saying we need 150,000 tools across the estate that does every different thing. We need to have some level of consolidation, and that's why we're trying to move all of our front end stuff to .NET, Cypress, etc., rather than having a mix of Selenium and Cypress and whatever else. But it's making sure we've got the right tools to do the job, and then where we can build our own stuff internally. Because automation for me isn't just about automating the tests either. It might be automating the process, the generation of test data, the creation of test databases, or whatever it might be. That doesn't have to be done manually. We can automate those steps along the way. It isn't just about the automated testing, but it is a useful exercise to make sure that we've got the right testing automated and using the right tools. So yeah, I can see why people would try and consolidate, but there's a limit to consolidation where there's different needs of different tools and different systems you have in place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing also that is interesting and fascinating for me is when you are talking about the quality of this big system with a lot of subsystems, then you need to some kind of measure it, or to understand whether you are going in the right direction or in the wrong direction. So which common metrics do you have, and are there these metrics only at the each subsystem level, or there are some general metrics on the higher level?
You mean as far as testing metrics?
Yeah, testing metrics, but
okay.
Starting from the testing metrics, but maybe you are using some other metrics.
Yeah,
For example,
I mean,
like vendor changeability or something.
Yeah, so we have certain measures of quality. We've got a risk-based weighted quality metric that we try and use on projects to give us a good understanding of whether the system is in a state to release, and it's kind of a where's the biggest risk to the projects. They have more weighted areas on the test results and the defects found. So a bug in a high risk area will have a bigger percentage knocked off the overall quality than a bug found in an area that we're not too worried about. And that gives us confidence that if we test the higher risk areas, so we have this quality achieved metric that we've used on various projects, and we're trying to standardize that. We're starting to look at things around cost of quality and what it means as far as implementation costs and tooling costs and actual overall spend, but within terms of quality. So could we get a high enough level of quality without spending lots more money and looking at it that way? We're using DORA metrics in the more agile areas, more sort of continuous delivery areas. There's DORA metrics that are in play there that we use from a quality perspective as well as from a delivery perspective. But we try and move away from the standard 100% pass rate for this project and that kind of stuff, because it just doesn't give any value. You need to make sure we've got the right levels of coverage and the right levels of quality and risk mitigation. And those for me is the accuracy of testing, the quality of the testing, and the risk mitigation. That's my focus areas.
Yeah, that's I think the main idea of the metric is just to get something that gives you some information that you can act on this information, and not just gathering some numbers in some spreadsheet.
And that's the thing with the quality achieved metric. We had some projects where the teams were stressing that they couldn't. The business were going, well, just get out the door, and we're like, but there's a really low level of quality. It's like 40% quality achieved, which would suggest that some big defects were still outstanding. And it wasn't until we visualized the risk in the different areas of the system and where the defects were, and they were all clustered in this high risk area, that the business went, yeah, we'll give you a few extra weeks. You go and do that testing, get it sorted, and come back to us when it's in a good place. And we were able to give them, regular sort of updates on how the quality is trending upwards again. Now we've got the testing and the fixes are in place, and that's enabled us to get the confidence that, okay, the quality achieved risk-based metric works, so let's use it in other projects.
But is it enough to just show these managers only the risk areas or the defect clustering in these risk areas, and that's it? Or you
No,
need
it's not.
to provide some more proofs?
Yeah, of
So
course.
which proofs can you provide?
You need more detail. You need more evidence of not just where the defects are, but how it's impacting the system and what the revenue impact would be if we release with these kind of issues, especially if it's customer facing, or if they can't enter their passport number or something like that. That's critical. They can't make a booking, et cetera, et cetera. So there's certain elements of we can prove the value of fixing defects by showing the revenue loss or revenue generation miss that we're not getting by this defect being in place, and we're able to plug into a lot of our systems and analytics and stuff to try and get some of that data to prove to people when we need to.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think we can go further with management and leadership stuff. And I'm curious regarding is a head of QA, how many QAs do you have, not including vendors, but internally in easyJet?
So internally within the perm team I have is less than 20. That's
Less than
including
20.
all the managers, et cetera, that I have across, and QE architects, etc. But if you include the third-party supplier testers, we have big teams. We have about 200. So it's mostly offshore, nearshore vendor, sort of third parties that replenish our team.
And about this one, what challenges in management in you can see here? Because it's not a common, I would say, configuration of the teams for most of the companies.
Agreed, and I'll be careful how much I say here, but it definitely creates challenges because you have a rotation of staff. You don't necessarily have the same team of people continuously. You will have people that roll on and roll off from different vendors for particular testing. So building that culture makes it very difficult because you want to build the team up to be able to share the message, and you're continually doing the introductions because you've got new people coming through the door. Whereas the team of perms we have all been embedded for multiple years now. They're all very familiar with the focus areas and trying to move things forward in that respect. So yes, there's always a challenge, and it's usually down to headcount budget as to why we're such a small team as far as permanent staff compared to the supplier base. But if you can get a good partner, and we've recently gone through a process of an RFP to define a new quality engineering strategic partner that we now use for all our third-party resources. If you have a good partner, and they are a partner, not just a supplier, they will work with you. You get the people at the leadership level from the supplier that will work alongside you, build into your strategy, and then they immerse their teams in it alongside you. And that's what we've been able to do with two key strategic partners that are really bought into what we're trying to do. They help us with our strategy sessions. We work together. We have offsites together where we go and build as a team. And then we've got a core team from the supplier that are on site with our permanent team. And then we flex up with the nearshore teams in Lisbon and the offshore teams in India.
Wow, cool.
So it's a complex mix, but it's working to a point at the moment.
Yeah, maybe you would need an offshore team in Ukraine.
I'm open to that if we can find the right partner.
Okay, I'm in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Cool. And as I can see here, challenge is to share your culture, share your the vision, the mission from the company to the vendors and across all of the parties involved into software production, or not on the software, hardware, software production, anything here. So I would. So what I'm like imagine in my mind is you have comprehensive documentation regarding all of the processes you have internally. Am I right or not? How much time you spent on writing documentation and writing the processes?
We have documentation, absolutely. Is it completely comprehensive? Pass, possibly in some places, possibly not in
That's
others.
sweet.
Most projects are a typical software delivery project, so the documentation is what you'd expect from a usual software project. But when there's any regulators involved, obviously the documentation increases, and that's where we need to make sure we've got the right levels of detail in place. But as far as understanding how we work and process and everything else, much prefer to get people in a room and collaboratively talk through it, share ideas, rather than giving them a 50-page document to talk through how we work, or point them at a Confluence site. So we do a bit of both. There's a bit of documentation where it needs to be, but then we like to do the in-person thing. I like to get people in a room, whether it's virtually or in person, and actually talk to them about, this is how we do things, this is what we need to do, this is et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and for me, it's always interesting on how to start. So as you have this structure that you built with a lot of vendors, and for the teams that just start to work with vendors and start to integrate and to form system of systems. So can you recommend maybe some materials or some resources, books or something that that you find useful in this sphere? Of course, it is first of all it is experience, and the whole context is unique for everybody. But maybe there are some general resources that can be useful.
So from a book perspective, even for the teams not working in Agile, I'd suggest the Agile testing books, because there's some concepts within them that are really useful to change and optimize the way you do testing. The Explore It book, Elizabeth Hendrickson, again, exploratory testing is a big part of what we do, and that's crucial to have that mindset on how you would look at things differently and think things through. There's a book that I read a lot of leadership books, and just encouraging my team to think outside the box is crucial. So there's a book called Break the Mold, which I by a guy called Tim Roberts, that I've shared and bought copies for all of my leadership team to make them think differently about not just testing, but them as people. How can we think differently? How can we work differently? How can we approach things differently? And that helps us with our testing, because testing ultimately is about thinking outside the box. Anyone can write, oh, we've got this requirement. Okay, let's write one positive test and one negative test to make sure it works. No, let's think wider. Let's think about what ifs and all this kind of stuff. And actually, sometimes that mindset comes from the constraints we put on ourselves. And if we take those constraints off and how we behave, then sometimes that can help with our testing processes as well. So I could list off a whole load of books. There's one called Leading Quality as well, which is by Ronald Cummings John and Oase Peer, which is about selling quality to the business and making sure the leadership teams and C-suites understand why quality is important. That's crucial. That's a big thing for us as a team as well. So, and that's one that I would share with vendors as well. Like, you need to be on page with this. This is what we're trying to do. You need to achieve this. Yeah, and then I'm more of a podcast listener and stuff like that as well. So I'd always recommend lots of testing podcasts. So there's a whole list of those. But yeah, absolutely. But there are a few books that we could share.
What is your favorite podcast? Except for ours,
other than Testing Peers and yours, of course.
Yes.
So I'd still listen to A/B testing, which is Alan Page and Brent Jensen. That's a good one. And then there's a few others as well. I'd have to look them up and tell you the names, but yeah, that's the main one. Our one, and there's Quality Talks. And there's one that Vernon Richards and Richard Bradshaw are doing as well, the Vernon Richards show. So they're all relatively new, the last two I mentioned there, but they're really good, insightful podcasts.
Cool. Yeah, there are interesting podcasts, and there's always interesting how people find very interesting guests, and they can light up some things in a different angle, even if the topic is something very usual, like test cases, or even like some very simple process. But there are a lot of people on Earth, and a lot of engineers, leaders, and they all can have their own experiences, and the experiences vary very much.
Agreed, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's we are gently moving to the end of this episode and end of this conversation. So we are very, very thank you for coming to our episode and for sharing your experiences, because before that, the only thing that I thought, of course, we all work in some cases in system of systems, but I thought that airline company is just a front end stuff, and that's it. So and only the front end stuff is responsible for something like delays or like losing some baggage or something like that. But there are a lot of things on the back end, and there are a lot of moving parts. And additional challenge in my perspective is that the company you need actually to validate the work for others. And I think key point here is the point of trust. So other
100%.
vendors should build trust with you, you should build trust with your management, and your company then in the end should build trust with the customers. So it's all up to the trust.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep. From my perspective, and what I'm thinking, because I'm more on management stuff, more on leadership stuff, and I can only imagine how tough it is to integrate all of these vendors and all of the people together to build uh, like to have to see in one direction all of the things, and to build. I think the hardest part is to build a culture, because the culture is something that we are do unconscious.
Yeah.
So and also I want to thank you, Simon, for this conversation. But also, it's important to say thanks to all of our listeners and YouTubers, watchers who watch us online on different platforms. Thank you for staying in us this time, and don't forget to hit subscribe button to our podcast and not miss our future episodes in Testing.minutes podcast.
And do not forget to try and listen to Testing Peers podcast as well, because there are a lot of interesting things there, and you can find a lot of different topics. Because, like, I haven't listened for a podcast maybe like half a year, but before that, it was interesting that there are a lot of people each episode that shares their experiences. Experience are totally different. So that's I think the main key point of this podcast. So please check it on the platforms. So yeah, then thanks a lot, and see you in the next episode.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah.